You're here with Ryan Grant for the Distributist Review. We're here today to talk about education. And education can be considered in two senses, a broad sense and a strict sense. In the broad sense of education, we can talk about what education is supposed to do in any field, what entails education, what makes it good and useful. And then we can also talk about, in a strict sense, what education does when applied to a certain field. And then we can also talk about how education works or does not work today, which frankly it does not work. So factoring all these things in, we have to look at also the economic impact of education, the economic requirements of the education. Is our current economic spending on education sensible, or is it not? And if it's not, how can we make it more sensible again? Or even should we? Should we spend any money on education, or we should just let the private market handle it? So these are all questions that have to be considered. When we look at education, and we look at it in a broad sense, we want to look at what does it do? What is it supposed to do? And there's two lines of thought here that are important. The first is that within the concept of the Latin word educare, to lead out of the darkness, so to speak. It's actually a verb that's drawn from another verb that's compounded, educere, which literally means just to lead out. And educare has the sense of leading out of, say, ignorance. And that means education, to educate. Plato, a 4th century philosopher in ancient Athens, was, for a time, a tutor for the Greek king of Syracuse's son, Dionysius II. Now, Syracuse, in case somebody's not too well read in their ancient history and geography, does not refer to an upstate New York university and some orange men. Plato's not there in the old orange costume cheering on a basketball team. Rather, Syracuse was a famous city of ancient Greece, one which the noted mathematician Archimedes took his residence there. This place, there's a lot of other history of Syracuse that's important, but not so much for education, at least in our current examination. So Plato wrote to a friend back in Greece, with several letters, and he wrote one that's generally referred to as the 7th letter. In the 7th letter, Plato lays down his theory of what a philosopher is. And for him, the philosopher is like the rest of humanity in the beginning. Humanity is in this cave. So this cave is, down under the earth. There's no light, except that it comes from a fire, or some light, as Plato says, a fire. The concept of flashlights and a glow wasn't around yet. A fire in the background, which men do not see, but it generates a light which they see. And there are overseers of sorts, which make shapes in the background. And these shapes, create images. And so people see the images, and they think that's reality. Oh, there's an image, it must be real. The philosopher is like everybody else in this respect. He sees the image, and it must be real. But then something happens. Not the philosopher, but an exterior force breaks the bonds. He gets out. He's led out, drawn out, as Plato says, out of the cave. And he gets out and he basks in the light. He sees the truth. When his bonds are broken, he's wandering around in the cave, he realizes that for the first time he doesn't know anything. And that's the first step to true wisdom in the Platonic system. You realize you do not know anything. Then the philosopher gets out of the cave and sees the light. He sees the truth. And light, plays a huge thing and a huge, huge purpose in Plato's philosophy. Again and again, the concept of illumination, which is very strong in philosophy until the 15th century. So Plato sees, the philosopher sees the light, but now it's not enough to be in the light. Just sit under a hammock eating grapes, and yep, there's that light. I can see it. I know something. This is great. He knows the truth, but knowing the truth comes with responsibility. It is not sufficient. Just say, oh yeah, I know the truth. This is good. Rather, according to Plato, the philosopher's job is to go back in the cave and to educate, to educere, to lead people out of the cave. And the problems the philosopher will encounter in the cave are not a few, or quite a few in fact. He has to go and convince people that what they're seeing is not real, that they think they know what's true and they don't. So he has to gain people who will realize they don't know anything and need to learn about the light. And people will resist him, because nobody likes to be told they don't really know anything, such as in Congress, for instance. Nobody likes to know that they don't know anything. Right? It's double ignorance. Nobody likes to hear that. So people are going to resist the philosopher, and in the end, they might even kill him. And Plato says that may very well happen, such as with Socrates. And the idea of a cave is instrumental for showing us how Plato viewed Socrates, who is so paramount in the history of philosophy that the first philosophers are called pre-Socratics, and then after Socrates, you have the post-Socratics, starting with Plato and Aristotle preeminently. So Socrates is this whole revolution in thought, but what happens? Well, he's put to death, because people don't always want to hear the truth. Socrates argued on the grounds of morals. People sometimes think Socratic method is this way of asking questions to get people to understand the truth in the head, and that's not true. Rather, Socratic method is about deducing morality. That's how Socrates, as depicted by Plato in the dialogues, uses it. Likewise in the Republic. Although that's far over and above what we're trying to do here. So education, thus considered, with respect to Plato, and what he writes in the 7th letter, is leading people from ignorance into truth. So thus education has to be concerned with truth. Truth is important. It can't be something that's merely relative, because if it is, well, what in the world are you trying to teach? There has to be something that's true. Well, okay, math and science is true. Alright, well, what about history? Well, it's up to people's opinion. Then how in the world can you teach it? And that's something we're going to deal with later. So there's another sense in which to treat the education broadly, and that is in terms of training. Now, a child is not so much going to be in the state of double ignorance, especially if he's been trained well by the parents, but he is in a state where even if he's smart, he does not know a lot. And he has to be shown things. This is something that's important, because we have this idea today that kids are just somehow innately smart and that we just have to trust them. They're perfect and they're innocent. Well, I'm sorry, anyone who's ever been in education will tell you that's rot. The children do not know. That's the whole purpose of sending them to the school. Otherwise, they would be teaching the classes and the teachers would be listening. Now, it's true. They always say, oh, yeah, a teacher learns more from his students, blah, blah, blah. A teacher does learn from his students. Every year that I have taught. I teach Latin currently at a high school, by the way. But every year that I've taught, I've learned something. And it's true. That does not mean that 5 days a week I need to be sitting at the desk and the student needs to be up there teaching. Except for the rare example of someone like Ibn Sina, otherwise known as Avicenna, the Muslim philosopher in the 10th century who was so smart he was teaching his tutor at the end. That is very rare, hard to find, and not likely to be found today. So, with regard to that, children have to be trained. So you have those two purposes of education, in a broad sense. Now we look at it in a strict sense. What should education be doing? Now, the Romans had a system of education which, for them, had been drawn out of their experience, by and large, hiring Greek tutors to come in and teach. For that is for the wealthy to hire Greek tutors to come teach their children. And so